Okay, hello and welcome everyone to another Affiliate Summit webinar. I'm joined today by Minnie, who will be leading the webinar on how to win on iOS 14. So Minnie is the Senior Product Marketing Manager for AppsFlyer. She has over a decade of experience in content and product marketing with a field of expertise in data privacy and attribution and a special focus on iOS 14. Now, just before I hand over to you, Minnie, I wanted to highlight to everyone that we have some extended time at the end of this webinar to answer any questions that you have. So if you have a question, all you need to do is put it in the chat function during the webinar, and we'll do our best to answer as many as we can at the end. That's enough for me. I'll hand over to you, Minnie, to begin.
Great, thanks so much, Jamie. Let me just share my screen. So hi everyone, thank you for the nice introduction, Jamie. Today I'm really excited to talk to you about iOS 14 and how to win in iOS 14 and some strategies for mobile marketing in the post-IDFA world. And if you've been following the news this week, it is upon us as of Monday, the 26th, when Apple released iOS 14.5 for general availability. So like Jamie said, my name is Minnie. I'm a Senior Product Marketing Manager at AppsFlyer for the past almost 3 years. My focus in the past 10 months has been almost exclusively iOS 14 and helping advertisers prepare for the changes that have now become part of our reality and strategize and learn and grow from them so that they can still be awesome mobile marketers after iOS 14. Today, I'm going to cover 3 topics with you. I hope we have time for everything. First, we're going to do a brief kind of overview of the iOS 14 impact and what it means for the industry. I'll talk a little bit about rethinking mobile strategy for advertisers. And at the end, we'll cover SK Ad Network, which is a bit of a broad subject, but I'll try to kind of zero in on a couple key strategies for maximizing SK Ad Network as a attribution tool. So let's get started. So technology, as particularly mobile technology, has really soared in the past couple decades. And as with all digital advancements, privacy has been playing a little bit of a game of catch up. And we've seen that privacy slowly catching up to digital technology, particularly in the past 3 years with the birth of GDPR, which I'm sure you are all have involved in, the implications of GDPR and how it's affected us. That was in 3 years ago now. But since then, we've seen a lot more regulations and privacy changes coming both from the outside of the industry and from within the industry. To improve privacy and make sure that consumer data is protected. So iOS 14 is essentially another step on this roadmap, and we don't anticipate it'll be the last. We anticipate there will be more. And it's not so much a challenge as an opportunity for more growth for advertisers and for the entire industry, and that's how we've been approaching it as well. We already know that there are more changes planned and coming soon. And this is a big one, but it's critical. So iOS 14 in its entirety actually covered a lot of privacy changes for consumers. We'll talk about that briefly in a minute. But the one that we're going to focus on today and the one that's probably been concerning the most for mobile marketers has been the App Tracking Transparency Framework. The App Tracking Transparency Framework in its entirety on the consumer side is this little prompt that you may have seen if you've upgraded your iOS version this week. But this prompt, when it was introduced last June by Apple, was very concerning for mobile marketers. And the reason is that it basically asks users to opt in to tracking, a very loaded word. It is daunting, it's possibly alarming for the user. And in the back end, what it's essentially giving the mobile marketer permission to do is collect the identifier for advertisers, the device ID, the IDFA. And if the user asks the app not to track, then the advertiser, the mobile marketer, can't collect the IDFA. And that is a huge change in this industry to what advertisers, ad networks, MMPs have been used to, which is that the IDFA is available for collecting without having to ask the user. This came along, like I said, with many other privacy updates for iOS 14, increased transparency to users on how apps are collecting their data, how they're using their data. The App Store now has these nutrition labels before you download an app, and it shows you all the different data points that are collected and why they're collected. All in all, a lot of really, really great updates for users that's about keeping their data private. And Apple actually, I don't know if you've seen this, they invested in these billboards that said, what happens on the iPhone stays on the iPhone. This is a really big, critical, crucial piece of Apple's identity right now is to promote user privacy. That's great for the consumer for lots of reasons. But it does make things very complicated for advertisers, and not because the industry wants to infringe on user privacy, God no, but because it changes the way things were done, and we have to reconsider what's going to happen next. So if the IDFA, if users opt out of sharing their IDFA, will it become obsolete? Will that become the norm, that they'll say, ask app not to track, and IDFA does not become part of our ecosystem anymore? How are advertisers supposed to monetize without being able to identify devices and know which ads have been shown? How can they create seamless user experiences without breaking deep links? It created a lot of complexities for advertisers and initially a lot of concern. And over time, since there was almost a year between the announcement and the actual enforcement, we've learned a lot together, and we've figured out ways that we can actually, like I said, grow from this and make the ecosystem better from it. Let's talk a little bit about UX strategy and some strategies that advertisers and mobile marketers can adopt to make the most out of this new reality. We're going to look at two sides of this coin, about onboarding users and user acquisition. We're going to talk about the pre-install journey, engaging with the user up until they install the app. And then we're going to talk about what happens after they install the app and the ATT prompt that we talked about earlier. So there's a couple different sides to this. Let's get started. One strategy that we recommend, and we've been recommending to our customers, is extending the pre-install journey with web to app campaigns. And we've actually seen a lot of our customers have adopted this, and not just our customers, but advertisers across the industry, investing and shifting some focus possibly to web campaigns, web ad campaigns. And there's several good reasons to do this, especially if your brand already has a really strong website and web presence in place, and you're just capitalizing off of your own medium that you've already built. So web campaigns are cheaper than mobile ad campaigns, and you have more control over how the brand is displayed. You can create a native, what we call a smart banner at AppsFlyer, a native banner that is in line with your app language and with your brand language and your brand creatives. And then eventually, whenever you want, encourage the web visitors to download the app. We've seen that this not only encourages downloads from more invested users, but that later on down their journey, users who have come from the web spend more money in the app, are more engaged in the app, and are more loyal over time. Another strategy would be to adapt app clips. App clips were introduced along with all the other iOS 14 updates last year, and they're sort of a mini version of the app, a lighter mini version of the app, where you show a user an ad, they can click on it, and they get a little pop-up with an action that they can take right away. Make an order, get a coupon, something of the sort. So it gives them some interaction with the app before they've committed to downloading it, and that way there's a little bit more control over the journey. It also reduces costs because you can acquire users in this way without them having to go through the whole process of downloading the app. And it again creates another step in which you've engaged with your users before the final install process. So that was about the pre-install journey. Let's take a little bit look at what happens once your users have installed. I have some good news. Well, I mean, it's good news, I think. We have our preliminary data about this prompt, the ATT prompt, is that roughly 39% of users are opting in, clicking allow, that is. And that number is a lot higher than the industry initially predicted. Initial guesses at what the opt-in rate would be for the ATT prompt were between 1% and 5%. And that was really concerning for a lot of players in the industry. But so far, what we've seen, because a lot of advertisers have already implemented this prompt even before enforcement started this last Monday, and we've seen that almost 40% across the board have opted in, and in some categories that number has even been much higher. So the initial kind of starting stats for this are a little more promising than we'd first thought. And there are strategies to get that number to increase. One of them is timing the ATT prompt and deciding when to show it to the user. There are upsides and downsides to delaying it. Initially, the kind of go-to strategy is to just launch it as soon as the app is first open, but you can decide to let the user engage with the app a little bit and maybe show it to them further down the funnel. For example, after they've taken a certain action, like reached level 5 of a game or added an item to their cart or so on, just to kind of maybe increase the likelihood that now that they've come to like the app and become familiar with it, they're maybe more likely to opt in. That's one strategy that you can take. Another strategy that you can take, and which we've seen more and more of in the past few days, is creating a native prompt that shows up on the screen right before the ATT prompt. We've seen some really nice examples of how brands have done this. Facebook has done this, and Nike has done this, and we're seeing more and more brands do this. And this gives mobile marketers just a little bit more real estate to kind of explain the reasoning behind why they would like users to opt in. There are rules that Apple has set forth about what is and isn't allowed to be in this native prompt. There are very specific rules about what the buttons beneath can say, and about the fact that you're not allowed to incentivize or gate any content based on this. But as you can see, if you show the prompt directly after this, it creates some connection, it creates some context, and increases the chances that users will be likely to hit the allow button. I'm going to move on to SKAd Network, and I want to kind of preface this and say that SKAd Network in itself is really complex and really got a lot of moving pieces, a lot of moving parts, and we sometimes hold webinars that are dedicated entirely to SKAd Network just for that reason. So I'm going to try to touch upon the topics, and it might be completely foreign and a little daunting, but I'll do my best to keep it at eye level. SKAd Network is a framework that Apple introduced actually 3 years ago, so long before iOS 14. But it's basically a privacy-centric API. It stands for StoreKit Ad Network that allows mobile advertisers to get attribution data about installs that happened on iOS. Now, this is the diagram that Apple has shared on their documentation for developers about how it works. And if you skip kind of the first couple images, you'll see it's got a basic explanation of interaction of user clicking on an ad inside an app, getting redirected to the App Store, installing the app, and so on and so forth. And this is it shows the back end of kind of how this works. So SKAd Network provides advertisers with kind of some really critical things. One of them is the attribution. The ad attribution here is deterministic. It's accurate because Apple knows what's happening on its end. It's a 100% deterministic attribution method. So there's no question of accuracy here. It's very private. It's designed with privacy in mind. There are several measures that Apple has put in place to make sure that end user privacy is maximized. For example, the postbacks that are sent by SKAd Network don't contain any user or device level data. Postbacks are sent at a delay so that there's no possible way to tie back a postback with a specific user or specific occurrence. And maybe the third and most interesting thing here is that ATT doesn't matter. SKAd network is completely independent of that ATT prompt because those two things have nothing to do with each other, and SKAd network doesn't share IDFAs. So it encompasses all users, and it has nothing to do with opt-in rates, and is something that should be considered as a benefit. But there are challenges for advertisers, especially those trying to wrap their heads around how to make the most out of SKAd network. We'll touch on two of them real briefly. One of them is conversion values, and the second one is timers. So let's take a look at this diagram again that I showed you real brief. We're going to focus on this piece right here, the update conversion value section. A conversion value, well, what is it? A conversion value is basically a grading system, a scoring system that advertisers can define for their app. And based on this definition, they will get a little piece of information back with a postback that indicates the score given to the user. There are 6 bits to define this. It's 6 bits, right, where each one is defined as a different number. In essence, the scores can be anywhere between 0 and 63 because of how bits are designed. And they help attribute some of the in-app events that you define to the install and help give a little bit of a broader version beyond what happens in the install. A little bit more insight into the KPIs that you might want to measure along with your installs. They are terribly complicated to understand. As you can see, each bit is like a switch, and there are 6 of them. And based on the score of the user, it will have a different value, anywhere between 0 and 63, just because of all the different combinations that you can have with each of them turned on and off. So it's the same thing, essentially. If you hear me saying 6 bits or 0 to 63, they're one and the same. And there's different ways that advertisers can take advantage of these 6 bits. They can dedicate all of them to one KPI, like in the flat example, where all 6 are dedicated to revenue. So for example, revenue between 0 and $63 would be one example. You can split them between a couple KPIs, for example, dedicate 3 to revenue and 3 to game progress, where revenue will be in certain touch points, and game progress might be which level they've reached in the game. And you can go even further and do a combo split. For example, dedicate 3 to revenue, 2 to progress, and 1 to some kind of binary question like, are you 13 and up or not? Those are kind of like the basic approaches to this. There are also advanced approaches to this. I'm not going to go into those today because we're limited on time. But the downside of splitting bits beyond one KPI is that you have less granularity. The more ways you split the bits, the fewer data points you can pick up. So there is a need to split wisely and define your strategy as a mobile marketer and what it is that you're looking to measure. And based on that, you have to map out all of your conversion values and figure out what each number is going to mean so that you can understand what a conversion value of, say, 43 means, right? And it's basically a map of a legend, if you will, of, okay, I've got this bit lineup, 000011. That means 10 levels of progress. This is just an example here from a far more complicated deck that we often present. So in this case here, based on this map, there is the digits 101, like on, off, on, as you can see, for revenue, and 110 for game progress. So that means they have spent more than $20 in the game and passed at least 25 levels. We've got 101110, and this is the table that combines everything together, gives us a conversion value of 46. And we can interpret it thanks to our legend table. I know that was a lot, but let's move on. I want to talk about one last thing here, and that is the timer, which you may have missed here in this diagram a lot too as we start off. But this timer is a very important element here because when an install occurs, the postback is not sent immediately to the ad network, as I mentioned before. There's a timer that delays the sending of the postback by at least 24 hours. It is not very straightforward to understand. It is triggered by the first time that the user opens the app, and it is at least 24 hours long. How do we figure? Well, when the app is first open, a 24-hour timer is set. If there's a conversion value, like we just saw, that is set that might postpone the timer somewhat, the timer checks to see if a conversion value was recorded. If it was, the timer is reset, and this keeps happening in a loop until we get to a point where the conversion value recorded is not higher than the previous one that was recorded. We wait for a 24-hour timer to run out, and the postback was fired back to the ad network. So essentially, there can be anywhere between 24 hours and who knows how long between a user converting and the postback being sent. And that's not exactly helpful to some app developers, depending on their KPIs and what it is they're trying to measure. So imagine, for example, that you're a game app developer and you're optimizing events based on day 3 revenue, which is often the case with game developers. They're looking at revenue on day 3, day 7, and so on to assess, app stickiness and how committed the user is to playing the game long term. So in theory, you can extend the timer. And how would you do this? So if you define app open as an event that increases the conversion value every time, meaning every time the app is open, the conversion value goes up. So when the mechanism checks to see if the conversion value is higher, it gets a yes, it is. The timer will reset each time. And essentially, you could do this up to 63 times as per the bits. So again, this is a strategy that is fitting for certain apps with certain needs, but it's got its limitations, because if the user doesn't open the app every day, one day the conversion value timer is going to come back and say, hey, you didn't open the app today. The conversion value is what it was yesterday. Expires. And it also creates a bit of a biased audience in which you're only optimizing based on the users who are really coming back every day. Another strategy is delaying the timer. And we've seen that this has been very helpful for customers that are measuring down funnel events, like subscription-based apps that want to know what happens 7 days or more after the download, so that they can assess whether the users are signing up after a free trial. And in this way, basically, the install attribution timer is delayed. It's not started right away the first time the app is launched. It will actually only start when a certain in-app event occurs, like you playing a song, or you're pressing play on a yoga workout or whatever. Basically, it guarantees 100% coverage, but only for those users who didn't churn out before the 7 days are up or before they subscribed. That's it for today. Those are my kind of major strategy points for you on iOS 14 and how to make the most of them. So like I said, there are 2 basic aspects to consider. What you can do before and after the install, and how you can maximize NSK ad network. I hope that was helpful. I'd be happy to answer some questions now.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Minnie. That was super helpful. And actually, a couple of questions already coming through. So we'll start with those. But just a reminder for everyone else who's watching the webinar, that this is now kind of a great opportunity for you to kind of have your questions answered directly by Minnie. So if you do have any, just please pop them in the chat function, and we'll try and cover as many as we can. First question is actually for us, just confirmation for everyone then, because a couple of questions come through on it, that you will all receive a copy of the presentation, the recording. This will be sent out to you via email with a link on where to view it. But the first question, Minnie, for yourself, let me just read it out here. How does this impact cross-device tracking, like a Google Ads campaign where a user clicks an ad on their desktop, clicks an ad on their desktop, and then goes back to a website on the phone's browser?
So clicks on an ad on the desktop and then goes back to using the phone?
Exactly, yeah.
So that's a bit more of a complex topic, because when you're talking about cross-device tracking or cross-device measurement, try and get a full view of the user journey from web to app, it's a bit of a different topic, because the technology used to to kind of figure out what user journeys look like across devices is very different. I'm not entirely sure how it's impacted without IDFA. I'm not even sure it is impacted without IDFA because oftentimes in order to tie together events like that, you're either relying on something like deep links that carry some information with them about where the user originated, or on, say, a login that occurred on the website and a login that occurred on the app, which can then tie together the user in both places. So I'd have to look into it a little bit more, but overall, that's the main concern here is about not being able to measure user activity across apps or across, back and forth to the same app, and thus not knowing which ads they've already seen and when they've been retargeted, and being able to optimize their experience and also being able to optimize them for conversion.
Perfect. Okay, a couple more coming through. So one here, what parts of the ATT prompt can advertisers control?
Okay, so there are 3 things the advertisers can control the ATT prompt. First of all, they can control, like we talked about, when it shows up and whether maybe they want to show a native prompt before it or not. That's one. They can also control the purpose string. So there was the initial text that's big and bold that says, the app so-and-so would like to track you across devices and websites or something like that. And then beneath that, there's some smaller text. You can actually, it's called a purpose string, and you can control what that purpose string says. Again, there are limitations. Apple's very clear about what you are and are not allowed to write there. For example, you're not allowed to write opt in or we'll kick you out, or anything that might incentivize or threaten the user to opt in. But it gives the app a chance to kind of explain why it is important for them to collect IDFA, so they can control the timing, they can control the purpose string, and they can control whether or not they want the ATT prompt to go up at all. Obviously, you cannot try to collect IDFA without showing the prompt, but it is a time that some advertisers have considered whether or not this is critical for their business, and that's something to think about as well.
Perfect. A couple more just coming through now as we speak. So how will this impact in-app tracking, i.e. without IDFA, can Facebook still track what a user is doing within their own app, and then brackets, videos watched, page views, etc.?
Well, I can't answer for Facebook, but I can tell you that in general, many apps have some sort of user engagement measurement in place to really understand how users are engaging with their apps. Whether it's Facebook or any app, they want to understand how the user experience is working. If it's not working, for example, if it's a shopping app, are they dropping off before they hit the cart? Are they dropping off after the cart? Are they viewing 3 things, getting annoyed and leaving? So user experience kind of measurement is separate than IDFA and advertising in that sense. As far as what Facebook might know specifically about, I can't comment on that for sure, but this is an inherent piece of app optimization and user experience optimization.
Yeah, perfect. So next one, do advertisers have to use SK ad network?
So no, advertisers do not have to implement SK ad network. It's recommended both by Apple and by us that SK ad network is a great attribution API. Like I said, it has its limitations, and I didn't cover all of them here, but it definitely helps, in spite of the ATT limitations, get a clear picture of which ads are performing well and which aren't, and it's a piece of the alternative for IDFA.
Perfect. So someone asking here, can you speak a bit more to the point about mapping your conversion values? If we input our 6 conversion events in AppsFlyer SK ad network settings, then does AppsFlyer do this mapping process in the background for us?
Yeah, I could probably speak for half an hour solid about conversion values and then some. It's very complicated. Okay, so essentially, let me comment on the AppsFlyer side of things. there are two different ways that advertisers, customers can input their conversion value map in AppsFlyer. One way is you can set it within our dashboard, within our UI. You can determine which events you want the conversion value to pick up on, whether they're engagement events, conversion events, and so on. And the other option is that you can actually upload the conversion value map already to us, and we'll implement it for you. And the good side of doing it through AppsFlyer is that if you're working with integrated partners through us, we will share the conversion value mapping with them, obviously, once you've enabled this feature, so that it's the same across all of the ad networks and advertising partners that you may be working with. But yes, I could speak a lot about it. It's not so much choosing 6 events as maybe choosing the critical events and deciding how much granularity you need for each one. And I think most advertisers are going to find that there's going to be a little bit of trial and error and optimization happening for the conversion value until they find like the right formula. And we're all still learning. And I hope that soon, when we have a little more, all of us, a little more experience, we'll be able to kind of also guide advertisers based on kind of what we've seen similar people in the space do, and say we've seen that for shopping apps, this is a good formula to kind of start with, and with gaming apps, this might work better for you.
Perfect. Great. Well, let's take one more question then. I know we've gone over slightly. Is the ATT prompt mandatory for iOS apps?
So the ATT prompt, like I mentioned before, it's not mandatory. It very much depends on what data the app is collecting. And Apple in their documentation goes into very specific lists of what it is that you would need to ask the user permission for using. So for example, collecting IDFA is one case, but I think collecting any other user identifiers also requires the ATT prompt. But they give real specific lists of both what you're collecting, what your third-party SDKs might be collecting, and in which cases you'll need to use that ATT prompt. If you try to collect the IDFA without presenting the ATT prompt, Apple will reject the app from the App Store and tell you that this is why. They'll say, hey, guess what? We saw you're trying to collect it, but there's no ATT prompt, so we can't accept your app.
Perfect. Also, just realized, I'm not sure if you mentioned the handout that we have on the webinar. If people want to grab that beforehand, if you want to say a quick word about it.
Oh, sure. So I've shared with you a report we did together with the MMA about, it was actually released just prior to the release of Apple's iOS 14.5 this week. And it was a survey that we conducted together with them. I'm just loading it right now so I can give you a brief. It's asking consumers about how they kind of view these changes and what they know about them, how familiar they are with them. Granted, this was before enforcement this week, so everybody's probably a lot more familiar now than they were a week ago. But we asked kind of very, very authentically, how would you be likely to react? And to get a kind of snapshot view of what consumers are really feeling and not what we might think they might be feeling or how we assume they're going to react. So it's a really interesting read, and it's got some interesting stats to look into there.
Perfect. I was actually going to mention the stats. Yeah, the stats in the beginning key findings are super interesting. So for anyone who wants to have a read of that, I recommend kind of you grab it now from the handouts tab just before this webinar closes to give you the opportunity to have a read of that. But that is kind of enough from us. Minnie, I don't know if you wanted to have any kind of closing thoughts or kind of closing words before we close up.
Sure. I will point out, it's still early days. Today is April 28th. It's been just barely 48 hours since ATT prompts became mandatory for relevant apps, and since iOS 14.5 became widely available. So we're all, like I said, we're still learning and we're still gathering information. And it's very likely we'll be a lot wiser in a few weeks' time. But we are working very hard to help advertisers as we all learn together and make sure that they're empowered with knowledge, whether it's about SKAd Network or our solutions for iOS 14. We're still learning and we'll be smarter, but for now, I think it's just important for anybody who this is relevant to and advertisers who are in this space to educate themselves and make sure they understand what's happening and how it affects them and how it may affect them in the future as we see similar things rolled out. And I'm happy to, answer any more questions if anything comes up in the meantime. And it's been a real pleasure speaking here today.
Perfect. Well, Minnie, it's been an absolute pleasure having you as well. So a huge thank you to yourself for leading the presentation, and thank you to everyone as well who asked the question. That's enough for us, and I hope to welcome you all to the next Affiliate Summit webinar. Bye for now.